Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. Today we're taking on a really monumental task, getting inside the philosophical mind of Mohandas K. Gandhi.
That's right. We're looking past the historical figure, the leader everyone knows, and focusing on Gandhi, the thinker, the philosopher.
Exactly. The man who built this incredible moral architecture. We want to move beyond the Salt March image and understand the deep system of thought that underpinned all his actions.
And our sources really help lay that out. His political work was just the tip of the iceberg, really. Underneath is this vast, detailed philosophy about, well, everything, the universe, God, what it means to be human.
You can't really grasp Satyagraha or his vision of Swaraj without first understanding his metaphysics. It all connects.
It really does.
So this isn't just biography. It's an intellectual exploration, a deep dive into this, blueprint for a nonviolent world he envisioned. And the goal for you, listening, is to see how those ideas connect, how his definition of God shapes his view on, say, colonial rule.
It's a fascinating system.
Let's start unpacking it right at the foundation, his concept of truth.
Okay, so the absolute cornerstone for Gandhi is his idea of the divine. But he was very careful with the word God.
Why the caution?
He felt it was just too loaded, too much anthropocentrism, thinking of God as a person and, cultural baggage attached to the word itself. He preferred terms like Shakti, cosmic power, eternal principle, something broader.
Which brings us to that really key moment in 1926. We often hear God is truth, but he flipped it. He said truth is God. What did that change?
That shift is profound. It was a masterstroke, both philosophically and practically. By making Satya, which means ultimate reality or truth, the primary concept, he creates this universal ground.
Universal how?
Because everyone, believe it or not, has to accept that something is real, that truth exists in some form. By saying that reality is the divine principle, he steps around all the arguments about specific deities or religious doctrines.
So even a committed atheist, if they're genuinely searching for how the universe truly works, is essentially on a spiritual quest by his definition.
Exactly. They're seeking truth, and therefore, in Gandhi's framework, they are seeking God. It just opens the door for dialogue with anyone seriously thinking about reality, regardless of belief. It makes the pursuit of knowledge itself sacred.
Okay, so what is this cosmic spirit, this Satya? It's not just a passive fact about the universe.
Not at all. It's active, it's pure consciousness, it's rational, it's orderly, and it pervades everything. Now, Gandhi didn't say it operates by human good and evil, but he did argue it has a kind of deep structural bias toward good.
A structural bias toward good. How did he argue for that? That sounds optimistic.
Well, he looked at the persistence of order of life itself, the fact that the universe generally holds together, that societies don't just instantly collapse into chaos. He saw that as evidence of some kind of benevolent, regulating spirit.
So if it were indifferent or worse, malevolent, things would just fall apart.
That was his reasoning. But, and this is crucial, he didn't see this spirit as all-powerful in the human realm. It respects limits it sets for itself, the main one being human freedom. Evil exists because humans choose it. Using that freedom, it's permitted, not predestined.
That leads us straight into that classic philosophical debate, faith versus reason. Gandhi knew you couldn't prove this cosmic spirit with logic alone.
Right. But he didn't just leap to blind faith. He actually challenged reason's dominance. He pointed out that strict rationalism can't even prove the existence of, say, the chair you're sitting on. If you only accept what's logically provable, you end up doubting everything.
He called the belief that reason's the only motivator a kind of idolatry, didn't he?
He did, because that belief itself isn't based on pure reason. It's a kind of faith in reason. So he didn't discard reason, but he said it wasn't the only tool. He proposed criteria for what he called rational faith.
Okay, what were those criteria? How do you justify believing something you can't strictly prove?
He had 4 main conditions. First, the belief has to be about things genuinely beyond reason's scope, like ultimate reality, not, scientific facts. Second, it can't contradict reason. It shouldn't be illogical.
Makes sense.
Third, it needs some warrant from experience. This could be deep spiritual insight gained through practice, or even just observing the general stability and persistence of life. And fourth, it should lead to beneficial consequences for the individual, for society. It should be a better hypothesis for living well.
But here's a challenge our sources raise. With modern science explaining so much about cosmic order, the emergence of life, through natural laws, doesn't that weaken the experiential warrant for his spiritual power idea? Can't science explain the stability he pointed to?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely challenges the necessity of invoking a spiritual power for those specific observations. Science offers powerful alternative explanations. A modern, strict rationalist might look at Gandhi's criteria for rational faith and say they're, well, a bit too accommodating.
So how does his system hold up then?
It pivots back strongly to that idea of direct experience. Gandhi would argue that through disciplined practice, meditation, service, self-purification, you can directly feel or perceive this cosmic presence. For him, that wasn't just a hypothesis anymore. It became a lived certainty. Critics call that subjective, of course, but for Gandhi, it was the ultimate validation.
Okay, let's shift from the cosmic scale down to the individual. Gandhi had this very strong cosmocentric view, right? Humans aren't separate or superior.
Exactly. He saw the cosmos not as a pyramid with us on top, but as an interconnected system of yajna.
Yajna, that means sacrifice, but he used it differently.
He broadened it to mean essentially interdependence and mutual service. Everything serves everything else. And since the cosmic spirit is divine, everything shares in that divinity. So humans aren't owners of the earth, we're custodians.
And that custodian idea fuels his pretty radical economic views, like saying taking more than you need is basically theft.
Precisely. Being a custodian means you have a duty of cosmic piety, of matri-friendliness towards all of creation. You have to cherish its diversity, respect its integrity, and try to minimize the violence that's just inherent in living what he starkly called the house of slaughter.
Rim phrase.
Yeah. And the only way to sort of balance the books for that unavoidable violence is by consciously restricting your wants and actively caring for nature.
So if our role is defined by that relationship, how did he see the structure of the human being itself? You mentioned 4 dimensions.
Yes, this is a really neat synthesis. First, there's the body. It's the source of our senses, our physical needs, and those desires that are inherently, unruly and seemingly insatiable. The wild horses that need taming.
And it also creates the illusion that we're separate individuals.
That's key. The body makes us feel like self-contained units. Second, you have manas, the mind. This is intellect, consciousness, ego.
The thinking part.
Right. It's meant to be a tool for knowing and acting. But it's also where passions reside. And the ego, the sense of I, is constantly trying to assert its separateness and continuity through time. This makes the mind inherently restless, insecure, always caught between past regrets and future anxieties.
So the work is to train the mind.
To train it to focus outward in service, not inward on its own preservation. Third, there's the Atman, the spirit.
The divine spark.
More than a spark, actually. Gandhi insisted the Atman within each being is identical in nature to the totality of the cosmic spirit. It's not just a piece of it, it is it, manifested individually. This is the source of that infinite spiritual energy, the engine behind nonviolence.
And its destiny is moksha, liberation.
Yes. But Gandhi translated moksha into the social and political realm. It means realizing your identity with all beings through selfless service. And finally, the 4th dimension, swabhava.
That's the unique part, the individual's specific nature.
Exactly. It's your personal ontological truth, your unique psychological makeup, your moral inclinations, your talents. He explained this using ideas like karma and the transmigration of the suksmasarira, the subtle body.
Subtle body.
Yeah, the idea is it carries impressions from past lives which incline you towards certain tendencies in this life. But, and this is critical, it only inclines, it doesn't determine. You always have moral freedom. The choice remains yours. Swabhava is your unique potential that you have a duty to realize.
Okay, so that 4-part structure really shapes his moral philosophy. It's not just about what we are, but what we owe. This idea of being born debtors.
Yes, the debt is fundamental. We inherit everything, language, culture, society, life itself, from our parents, from the earth. These are gifts so vast you can't even quantify them, let alone repay them directly.
So our duty, our dharma, is just to participate.
Essentially, yes. Recognize your dependence, recognize the gifts, and contribute back to that universal system of yajna, that mutual service according to your own unique capacity, your swabhava.
And the idea that the Atman is identical in everyone, that becomes a powerful tool for critiquing oppression, doesn't it? I find that argument that the oppressor actually degrades themselves really striking.
It's a radical moral insight. When you treat someone else as less than human, you're implicitly saying it's okay for any human to be treated that way. You lower the bar for everyone, including yourself.
We coarsen your own soul, in a way.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You blunt your own moral senses, plus you rob society of the unique contribution that person could have made if they were allowed to flourish. Think about colonial rulers. They had to build these elaborate, twisted justifications for their actions, which, Gandhi argued, inevitably damaged their own psyche, their own integrity. It creates losers all around.
Okay, I get the philosophy there. It's elegant. But let me push back a bit. Politically, that's a hard argument to make stick, isn't it? The oppressor often feels like they're winning. They have the power, the wealth. If feeling degraded was enough to stop oppression.
We wouldn't need satyagraha.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the core problem satyagraha is designed to solve. The oppressor is trapped in that illusion of separateness we talked about, driven by the body's desires and the ego's fears. Their inner moral compass is, well, offline, blinded by prejudice or self-interest. They can't see the shared Atman, so the external rewards seem more real than the internal spiritual damage.
Which is why just talking rationally doesn't work.
Right. You need something more potent, something that can jolt their moral awareness back online.
Okay, we'll get to that jolt. But first, let's nail down his idea of freedom. It's not just do whatever you want.
No, definitely not. For Gandhi, freedom isn't about maximizing choice. It's the necessary condition for discovering and living out your own truth, your swabhava. Freedom matters because integrity matters.
And compulsion is evil because...
Because forcing someone to act against their genuinely held beliefs, even if you think those beliefs are wrong, forces them into hypocrisy. It plants, as he put it, a lie at the very center of his being. It destroys the very possibility of self-realization, which requires authenticity.
So freedom is really freedom for truthfulness. And this connects to how he saw rights and duties not as opposing forces, but integrated in the idea of dharma.
Exactly. Dharma is a beautiful concept here because it wraps up nature, your swabhava, right, and duty all together. They regulate each other. Your right to develop yourself is also your duty, because realizing your potential is how you contribute to the whole yajna.
So you have a duty to claim your rights and a right to fulfill your duties.
It's a seamless moral fabric, unlike the Western liberal tradition, which often pits individual rights against collective duties.
Okay, the philosophical groundwork is laid. Now we get to the method. Satyagraha. Soul force. Before introducing it, Gandhi had to argue why the standard ways of fighting injustice, reason, and violence just didn't cut it within his system.
Right. Reason fails, as we touched on, because injustice often isn't just a mistake in logic. It's rooted in prejudice, hatred, moral blindness. When someone's heart is closed, Gandhi found appealing to their head is worse than useless. The emotions dictate the argument.
You can't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into.
Pretty much. And violence, that's rejected on multiple levels. Fundamentally, it denies that core belief in the shared Atman, the opponent's innate goodness and capacity for change.
But there's a pragmatic reason, too, isn't there? About knowledge.
Yes, the epistemological argument. To justify something as irreversible as violence, you'd need absolute certainty that your cause is 100% right and your opponent is beyond redemption. But Gandhi insisted humans only ever see truth partially, in fragment and from different angles.
So claiming the certainty needed for violence is arrogant.
It's an epistemological impossibility for humans. Therefore, violence is always an overreach, which leads directly to his famous principle about means and ends.
Ah, yes, the means are ends in an embryonic form.
Exactly. The way you fight shapes the peace you get. You can't build a just, nonviolent society using unjust, violent methods. The methods inevitably contaminate the outcome. It's like planting poison and hoping for fruit. The action is the outcome, just in an earlier stage.
So if reason fails and violence is wrong, satyagraha emerges. How did he define it? Civil insistence on truth.
Yes, or tenacity in pursuing truth. And its core operating principle is what he called suffering love. He saw this as the most powerful force for transformation, a kind of surgery of the soul.
Surgery of the soul. How does that work? How does suffering transform the opponent?
The goal is to awaken the opponent's own dormant Atman, their own conscience. Gandhi believed that while reason appeals to the head, the penetration of the heart comes from suffering.
Who's suffering?
The suffering of the satyagrahi, the nonviolent resistor. When they patiently endure the opponent's violence without retaliation, without anger, it disrupts the whole dynamic. The oppressor expects fear or counter-violence.
But they get endurance, maybe even compassion.
Exactly. And that creates this intense cognitive dissonance. Why isn't this person fighting back? Why aren't they hating me? It forces the oppressor to look inward, to question their own actions, rather than just reacting to the opponent's actions.
And it mobilizes others, too.
Yes, the moral courage of the sufferer often sways neutral observers and isolates the oppressor, increasing the pressure for them to reevaluate.
This is where fasting comes in, right?
Right.
A very controversial tactic.
Extremely controversial. Gandhi was adamant it wasn't political blackmail, though critics certainly saw it that way, and it often had that effect. He framed it as a form of intense spiritual suffering, drawing on Hindu tapas, penance, and Christian ideas of vicarious sacrifice.
He had specific rules for it, though. It wasn't just a hunger strike against anyone.
Very specific rules. He outlined 4 main purposes. 1, to express his own deep sorrow or repentance for wrongdoing by his own followers taking responsibility. 2, as an atonement for those failings.
So often directed inward, at his own movement.
Often, yes. 3, to stir a sluggish conscience, again, often among his allies, to shake them out of complacency. And 4, sometimes to bring warring factions together, creating a space for resolution. But crucially, he said it could only be used against those with whom he shared a bond of love or affinity. Never against a declared enemy or a stranger, because that would be coercion.
That brings up attention. The sources highlight this paradox of realism. He aimed for spiritual transformation, but he operated in the real world of politics. He used terms like nonviolent warfare, talked about needing to compel opponents.
Yes, the language definitely shifted when he was leading mass movements. The intent might have remained purely moral, changing hearts, but the effect on the ground, with huge protests, boycotts, civil disobedience. It undeniably involved compulsion. It disrupted the state, threatened its stability.
But was everyone involved acting out of pure suffering, love?
Realistically, no. Many were driven by nationalism, by strategy, by anger at injustice. Gandhi provided the overarching moral framework and the method, but mass movements are complex. That tension between the spiritual ideal and the political necessity is just inherent in satyagraha when applied on a large scale.
And this leads to the criticisms, the limitations of the method. It doesn't work if the conflict isn't about malice, but about 2 genuinely different, deeply held views of what's right.
That's a key philosophical limit. If both sides believe their cause is just and see the other's suffering as perhaps necessary or deserved for their own vision of good to prevail, then the suffering doesn't create that dissonance. It might even harden resolve.
Like the Sharpeville example the sources mentioned, the authorities didn't see the protesters' suffering as undeserved.
Exactly. The suffering was interpreted within their own framework as justified, even necessary to maintain order. Satyagraha fundamentally relies on the opponent having some shared moral framework, some capacity for empathy or shame, a degree of decency, you could say.
And practically, it needs certain societal conditions. An open society.
Yes. Critics like Buber and Greenberg pointed this out starkly regarding totalitarian regimes. A Gandhi facing the Nazis likely wouldn't have lasted long. You need things like a relatively free press, the ability to mobilize public opinion, and some level of interdependence between the oppressor and oppressed.
The oppressor needs to care about something: reputation, stability, their own conscience.
Right. If the opponent is truly sociopathic or operates in a completely closed system where dissent is instantly crushed and unseen, then Soul Force has no leverage, nowhere to gain traction.
And yet, despite all these limits, its impact was enormous. Martin Luther King Jr.'s adoption of it is maybe the most famous example.
Absolutely. King explicitly credited Gandhi. He said something like, Christ furnished the spirit and motivation, while Gandhi furnished the method. It was Gandhi who showed King how to take the Christian ethic of love and turn it into a practical, large-scale strategy for social change.
It proved the method wasn't just tied to India or Hinduism.
Exactly. It demonstrated its potential universality, its adaptability to different contexts, even within a flawed Western democracy fighting its own deep-seated injustices. It lifted the love ethic to a powerful social force.
Okay, let's pivot now. We've looked at Gandhi's foundations and his method. Now let's look at what he was fighting against. His critique of modern Western civilization was, well, it was sweeping.
It was total, really. He saw it as fundamentally flawed at its very root because it prioritized the body over the soul. It got the human hierarchy wrong, violating our inner nature.
And the result of focusing on the body is
a civilization driven by endless self-interest and what he called undisciplined self-indulgence. The whole system, especially the economy, is geared towards creating new wants, constantly stimulating desire, making profit the ultimate goal with no real moral compass.
Which is why he famously said, real civilization isn't about multiplying wants, but about deliberately restricting them.
Precisely. He saw industrialism, especially mechanization driven purely for profit, as a disaster. It wasn't really saving labor. It was concentrating wealth, creating unemployment, and reducing people to helpless and passive spectators in their own lives, a new kind of slavery.
And it created restlessness, undermined community.
Yes, constant change, constant striving for more, moving for work. It eroded stable communities and left people feeling anxious and unmoored. Dignity gets lost when your main value is just being a small part in a huge, impersonal economic machine.
This leads to a distortion of morality itself.
He thought so. In such a system, morality gets watered down to just enlightened self-interest or prudence. You follow the rules because you fear punishment, not out of genuine goodwill or a sense of duty. The social fabric becomes thin, based on calculation rather than connection. It becomes aggressive, competitive, lacking the sweet smell of humanity, as he put it.
And this breeds violence, not just physical violence, but structural violence.
Yes, he saw violence oozing from every pore of modern society. It was in the regimented way individuals had to live, in social relations backed by the coercive power of the state, and obviously in the way nature was ruthlessly exploited for resources.
So things like colonialism and world wars weren't just historical accidents.
For Gandhi, they were the logical, inevitable outcomes of a civilization built on greed, competition, and materialism. There were structural expressions of that underlying aggressive impulse.
He also went after the philosophical underpinnings, particularly what he saw as a dangerous over-reliance on reason.
Right, that naive rationalism. He called it a hideous monster that claimed to know everything. He argued that modern thought had wrongly elevated reason above all other human faculties, intuition, tradition, faith, experience, wisdom.
And applied it everywhere, even where it didn't fit.
Exactly. Leading to this arrogant, intolerant worldview that dismissed anything it couldn't measure or quantify, like morality or spirituality. It fostered this dangerous illusion that humans could perfectly engineer society and control nature, ignoring life's inherent uncertainties and complexities.
And this flawed rationalism, coupled with the self-interested citizens it produced, necessitated the kind of state we see today.
The centralized, powerful modern state became a necessary evil. If society is just a collection of atomized individuals constantly competing, you need a strong external force to impose order.
And that state then takes over everything.
It tends to monopolize political action and even moral feeling. People start thinking that preserving the state is the highest good, and their main duty is just to obey the law. Democracy becomes, in his rather cynical view, just a game of chess between elites with ordinary people as pawns, masking the reality of class interests.
But he wasn't purely negative, was he? Our sources say he did acknowledge some achievements of modernity, even if he thought they were distorted.
That's important. He wasn't advocating a complete return to the past. He praised three things in particular. First, the scientific spirit, the genuine curiosity, the rigorous method of inquiry. He just thought it was misused by positivism, which tried to claim science was the only valid form of knowledge.
Okay, well.
Second, the mastery over nature, things like advances in medicine, reducing suffering. He saw value there, but felt it was disported by an unhealthy, morbid fear of death and a complete lack of restraint, of knowing when enough is enough.
And the third.
The organizational and civic virtues that modernity fostered, things like punctuality, efficiency, respect for public rules. He admired those, but he lamented that they were usually based only on self-interest, following rules to avoid trouble, rather than genuine community spirit or goodwill. His goal wasn't to destroy these things, but to purify them, ground them in a moral framework.
So if modern civilization was the problem, what was Gandhi's solution? His alternative vision? That brings us to Swaraj.
Swaraj. It literally means self-rule or autonomy. But for Gandhi, it was much deeper than just political independence. It meant a state free from all forms of domination and coercion, shasan mukta. A society where power, like Shakti, genuinely resided with the people.
But it starts with the individual.
Absolutely. Swaraj begins with self-discipline, self-control. He argued that Western liberal freedom, without that inner moral compass, just leads to chaos and self-indulgence, which then ironically necessitates an even stronger state to clean up the mess. Real freedom for him was moral autonomy.
And the structure of this ideal society flowed directly from those core philosophical principles we discussed earlier.
Yes, you can see the 5 guiding principles clearly. Cosmic piety, respect for all life, non-exploitation, cooperation over competition, Swaraj itself, moral self-rule, epistemological pluralism, valuing reason, tradition, faith, etc., and personal autonomy, the freedom to live out your swabhava.
How did that translate into, like, a system of government?
He envisioned something radically decentralized. The basic unit wasn't the nation-state, but the small, self-governing village community, the village republic.
And these villages would connect how?
Through expanding circles. Villages would cooperate in districts, districts in provinces and so on, up to a central coordinating body. But, and this is key, power flows from the bottom up. The center serves the circles. It doesn't dictate to them. The goal was maximum autonomy at the local level.
Okay, what about the economy? He rejected capitalism and communism. What was his alternative? The trusteeship model?
Yes, the trusteeship model was his attempt at a nonviolent third way. The idea is that wealthy individuals, or those with special talents, don't truly own their wealth in an absolute sense. They hold it in trust for society.
So they keep formal ownership,
But the use of that wealth, the profits, their own income level, even who inherits it, would be subject to social approval, potentially regulated by the community or the state. Wealth becomes a tool for the common good, not just private gain.
Right, but here's the big question the sources raise, and it feels like a major hurdle. How do you get the wealthy to voluntarily renounce that level of control? Especially in a complex, modern economy. Doesn't this inevitably require a strong, coercive state, the very thing he disliked?
That is the central tension, absolutely. Gandhi's ideal was always voluntary change, achieved through moral persuasion, through satyagraha, through public pressure shaming the rich into acting as trustees.
But did he think that would realistically be enough?
He hoped it would, but he wasn't entirely naive. He did concede, reluctantly, that if moral pressure failed, the state might have to step in and legislate trusteeship. It could set limits on income, approve heirs, ensure profits were used communally.
So he kind of backed into needing a fairly strong state to achieve the economic justice his system required, even while arguing against centralization.
It seems that way. It's an internal contradiction he wrestled with. The need for equity pushed him towards accepting a level of state intervention that conflicted with his anarchist leanings. This fits with his broader economic vision to decentralize production as much as possible, focus on local self-sufficiency, use appropriate technology.
Keep industries small scale.
Wherever possible, yes. Restrict large-scale industry only to absolute essentials that couldn't be produced locally. This was vital to prevent cities from exploiting rural areas, which he saw happening constantly in the modern system.
His ideas about law and justice were also pretty radical, weren't they? Moving away from state courts.
Very radical. He advocated for community-based people's courts. The focus wouldn't be on abstract legal precedent, but on solving the actual underlying problems between people, restoring relationships, mending the social fabric.
More like mediation and reconciliation than judgment.
Exactly. Quick, inexpensive, accessible, and focused on evolving justice based on the community's moral understanding, not just rigid application of state law. Justice as a living communal process.
And all of this relies on citizens being incredibly responsible, taking ownership of the state.
Yes, the state, even in his minimal version, is seen as institutionalized cooperation. Citizens aren't just subjects, they're responsible for what the state does. This leads to his idea of earning the adhikar, the moral right, to disobey an unjust law.
You can't just disobey because you don't like it.
No, you have to demonstrate your general respect for law, your moral seriousness, your commitment to the community first. Then, civil disobedience, done publicly, nonviolently, respectfully, isn't an act of anarchy. It's a way of strengthening the state's moral foundation by forcing it to confront injustice. It's disobedience rooted in a desire for a better law, a better state.
So looking back at the whole vision, he was fundamentally redefining core political ideas we take for granted, like freedom.
Completely. Freedom wasn't just about having lots of choices. It was about making choices that were authentic, choices that aligned with your inner truth, your swabhava, choices that could be integrated into a coherent, whole way of life. It's freedom as integrity.
And equality, too. Not about everyone being the same or competing on a level playing field.
No, it was about fellowship, Mutuality. Equality meant ensuring everyone had the resources and opportunity needed to fully realize their unique potential, their swabhava. Because degrading anyone, denying them that chance, doesn't just harm them, it harms the whole community by depriving it of the unique gifts that person could have offered.
But we have to end by acknowledging the challenges, the internal tensions in the vision itself. It's powerful, but idealistic.
Deeply idealistic. The sources point out the big ones. His vision is largely rooted in a rural agrarian ideal, which clashes significantly with our highly urbanized, globally interconnected world. And that tension we discussed, needing a strong state for economic justice versus his deep suspicion of centralized power and bureaucracy, that's a fundamental conflict within the blueprint itself. Hashtag tag tag outro. But ultimately, I think Gandhi's real legacy isn't just about whether his specific blueprint is perfectly achievable, it's about his philosophical originality. He showed it was possible to ground politics firmly in morality and spirituality without falling into religious dogma or theocracy.
He built a coherent system, a different way of seeing the world.
Yes, rooted in this profound sense of interconnectedness. He forces us, even now, to question things we take for granted about progress, about violence, about the economy, about ourselves. He stretches our moral imagination.
It really does leave you thinking. Einstein famously said, "Generations to come will scarce believe that such a one as this ever in flesh and blood walked upon this earth." Thinking about our world now, with all its complexities, its violence, its moral ambiguities, what part of Gandhi's vision feels the most essential for us to strive for, even if it seems the hardest to reach?
Is it the radical decentralization, the rejection of consumerism, or maybe it's that constant demanding personal commitment to aligning our actions with our deepest truth, pursuing nonviolence in every interaction?
Does meaningful political change first require that deep inner transformation he talked about?
That's the challenge he leaves us with, a demanding one.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the philosophical architecture of nonviolence. We'll see you next time on The Deep